This is the Anime Triple Play, where I take a look at 3 anime that all have something in common. Today, a super spooky look at some horror anime. Trying to find an anime that can be comfortably categorized in the relatively narrow genre of horror is a bit like trying to find Bigfoot. Sure, on paper it's entirely plausible that it exists, but actually laying eyes on it ends up being way harder than you would imagine. In fact, there's actually a pretty good argument to be made that horror anime just doesn't exist, or at least not any good horror anime, that is. Well, I disagree with that conclusion, so let's take 3 stabs at it and see what we can come away with. First up, Corpse Party. With a name like Corpse Party, you might think this is some sort of campy, so bad it's good B-movie inspired slasher flick, but you'd be sorely mistaken. Instead of taking after the likes of Dawn of the Dead or Planet Terror, Corpse Party seems to take a far better liking to films like Hostel and Saw. Okay, so before we get too deep into this, let's go over the premise of our gore-obsessed anime. 9 high school students sneak into the school at night to bid one of their friends farewell before they transfer out. They decide to perform a ritual of sorts to wish each other good luck. However, if performed even slightly wrong, so the legend goes, they will all be cursed with a terrible fate. With that little caveat, you'd think people would just not do something like this. I mean, you're asking 9 high schoolers to do something absolutely flawlessly on the spot, or else. Well, wouldn't you know it, something went wrong and now they've all been transported to an alternate dimensions version of their school. Unbeknownst to them, their high school stood atop the remains of Heavenly Host Elementary, where a series of gruesome murders took place. Now trapped and separated from one another and slowly losing their sanity in this nightmarish hellscape, the students must set aright the matters that trouble these lost souls trapped in this place in order to find a way back. But also lurking in this dimension's depths is the soul responsible for the murders that took place so long ago. This 4-part OVA series uses its status as an OVA to full effect as they make no effort to censor anything in the anime. It's a slasher torture porn type of horror anime, so having that extra leeway helps out a lot in the show's execution. One reaction on Kitsu describes this anime as, quote, an interesting documentary on intestines. And, well, he's not exactly wrong. In pretty much every single kill, somebody's getting graphically disemboweled and the main baddie's choice of tool? A good old trusty pair of scissors. If that doesn't sound too menacing, well, don't worry, by the end of this anime will teach you to never run with scissors ever again. That being said, there's an awful lot of gore just for gore's sake in this hell school. There's just random buckets of entrails lying around all over the place, nameless maggot-infested corpses strewn out in the hallways, and when the restless spirits of ghost kids start popping up, the gore shifts into maximum overdrive. Some of the kills in this gore porn slasher anime are pretty inventive, but more often than not, they just defy belief and explanation. Like in this one scene, our scissor-wielding bad guy goes off screen and we hear some screams and stomach-churning sound effects before the screams stop and it is revealed that the bad guy has used a pair of scissors to cut straight through some kid's skull, bisecting it. That just doesn't seem physically possible.
That's exactly what Jimmy kept screaming. This doesn't seem physically possible!
Staying with this scene just a moment longer, the sound design crew and voice actors really nailed these kind of moments. When Homeboy was cutting this girl's skull open, I really did buy that we were cutting through some thick tissue and bone, despite the fact that it just seems gratuitously impossible. Anyway, as if you couldn't already tell, this anime is just straight up nasty. It's far more likely to make you want to hurl rather than feel any sense of terror. So as a horror anime, this one seems to fall just a little bit flat. Also, it seems to have forgotten the point of a slasher flick, and that is to have some level of catharsis with its kills. With some, if not most of the kills, it should be the fault of the victim doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, or the heel getting killed thanks to their own hubris. But in Corpse Party, very few kills seem like they're even remotely earned. A lot of times it's just some poor schlub getting axed for no good reason, clear out of the blue with no warning either. You gotta let me bask in the tension of the moment, show. Let me marinate in the slow simmering dread from the anticipation of the kill. Don't just give it to me. Woo me and seduce me with the sweet perfume of gore. Don't just shove it in my face. Alright, so Corpse Party was a bit of a loss. Even people who played the video game source material thought this one was bad. So how about something a little bit more subtle? Let's go down the suspense mystery route with this one. 2012's Another. First, let's get the obvious out of the way. What a terrible title for a show. It makes it almost impossible to search for online or even find merch for, which really sucks for me because I genuinely like this show for the most part. Here's the setup. In 1972, at Yomiyama High School, a much beloved student suddenly passed away. Not knowing how else to grieve for their lost friend, the students of her class, 3-3, pretend as though that she had never left, counting her president roll call and even leaving her desk unmoved. 26 years later, Koichi Sakakibara transfers into Class 3-3 of the same high school. He misses the first few days of class due to illness, but once he attends class for the first time, he notices things are a bit off. everyone seems to be ignoring an eye patch wearing girl named May, and when he asks about her, everybody acts as though she doesn't exist. As it turns out, the class of 3-3 has been cursed since 1972. Every year, a student attending the class is actually a restless ghost, and students in the class will begin to die in suspect ways until the ghost is found out. In order to counteract this, the class has traditionally picked on one unlucky classmate to be completely ignored in order to temporarily lift the curse. However, since Sakakibara missed the first several days of class, he isn't privy to this and interacts with May, thus making sure that the curse is in full effect this year until the ghost student can be found out and the curse lifted for another year. What ensues is basically just Final Destination the anime. Corpse Party might have some interesting kills to its credit, but another puts them to shame. Some of these you might see coming, but others come straight out of left field, but in a good sort of way. This show really knows how to let you soak in the tension and dread and give you at least a halfway decent payoff down at the end. However, the show likes to do a bit of trickeration with its big secret of who the ghost is. It even goes so far as to straight up lie to you at some points, and sell you on some red herrings just to keep its secret safe. And that's the show's big fault. It never gives you any decent clues or hints, and you're no better off at episode 10 than you were at episode 3. Now to get to my next point, I'm going to have to delve into some spoiler territory for the next few seconds, so just jump ahead to this timestamp if you don't want to hear any of it. You've been warned. By the time we hit the show's halfway point, we've been on some shaky ground, but it seems as though we could recover. But in the big climax, we find out who the ghost was, and if you're like me, there's really just 3 suspects. May, Sakakibara himself, and the obvious choice if you ask me, the auxiliary library dude. However, it's none of those people. As it turns out, Sakakibara's aunt, who was only in a handful of episodes, was in disguise as the class's teacher's assistant the whole time, and she was the ghost. Yep, Sakakibara's aunt was dead the whole time, but still counted as part of the class because she was the TA. Sakakibara knew his aunt was disguised as the TA, but the show never bothered to tell us, so we don't even know that this was an option. Also, the teacher's assistant wasn't even in most of the episodes. The show made no attempt to make us give a shit about her or even remind us that she was even in the show. It's like M. Night Shyamalan's movie Devil. The ending is just a total ass pull and it can go straight to hell. The author ruined a pretty good show by just not knowing how to fucking end it. Okay, with that aside done, that has hopefully made my point that the show is a lot more ambitious than it is competent. That doesn't mean that the show doesn't have its moments though, because when it's good, it's pretty damned good. Like this one scene where the kids find an old tape recording of one of the former students talking about how they found out who the ghost was in their class. When they say the student's name, the tape just becomes garbled and unintelligible, as though some supernatural force has come in and physically altered the tape in our world. That scene sent shivers up my spine. Something about that just creeped me right the fuck out. Also, just as a fun fact, when watching this show for the second time with some friends in a late night marathon session, there was a thunderstorm going on and the power flickered out. And when it kicks back on, the TV had frozen on this fucking frame, and we all collectively lost our shit and called it a night. Needless to say, I don't think I slept a wink that night. So there you have it, a show too deep in over its head to give you a satisfying mystery suspense horror story, but it does show some promise in more than one spot. With a little bit of tweaking here and there, it could have been a truly great series. So to round out our horror anime triple play, how about an old standby, Zombies with High School of the Dead? If Quentin Tarantino were to direct an anime while high on ecstasy, this would be it. The plot is pretty straightforward and pretty much everything you would expect from a zombie B-movie. The zombie apocalypse has finally come and it's up to our lovable cast of 6 of the unluckiest bastards in the world to navigate it and try to get to safety. Along the way, they find out that they have to deal not only with the shuffling undead masses, but people trying to take advantage of the chaos and go all Mad Max and shit. See, just like every other zombie apocalypse movie, except this one has fan service. I'm a sucker for gratuitous fan service, but in High School of the Dead, it can get downright distracting at times. They seem to put fan service in almost every conceivable shot. So the one thing that immediately sets it apart is done too much. So what else do we have to work with here? Well, quite a bit actually. Not only do we have a really well structured zombie series with proper arcs and twists being pulled off just about flawlessly, but the action sequences, of which there are many, are all spectacularly well done. You may be thinking that this series has no business being this damned good, but when you see that the director of High School of the Dead is the same guy who directed Attack on Titan, it all starts to make a little bit more sense. The action sequences here are so memorable in their solid execution and absolute absurdity that you've likely seen them a countless number of times even if you don't know what show they're from. Like this iconic scene. You know, somebody actually did the math on how fast her tits had to be moving in order for them to dodge a bullet like this, and I fucking love shit like this. I mean, I live for people doing calculations and asking absurd questions about absurd stuff. I just love this so much. It's like everything I love all glommed together, and I had this show to thank for it. My own bias now made painfully obvious aside, the show has a bit of a revving up period in its first 2 episodes. It's pretty predictable, and there's a few road bumps with our MC Protag guy and his main love interest, but once it goes up through the gears, hold on to your ass, pally. That ain't no sports car you done strapped yourself into, this is a goddamn rocket ship. So with all of that wrapped up, let's take a look at how we fared in this triple play. Corpse Party is a torture porn gore fest and not much more than that, but hey, there's a time and a place for that, and if that's your thing, then this show should suffice pretty well. Another takes a pretty good stab at the suspense mystery side of things, but at the end of the day, its strong suit is just being a long succession of inventive kills, much like Final Destination. However, just like that series of movies, it's got a pretty short shelf life. It doesn't hold up too well on second viewings. And then our final effort, High School of the Dead. With enough camp, fan service, and bloody gruesome zombie kills to make any weeb happy this Spooktober, High School of the Dead is definitely at the top of the pile when it comes to anime horror entries. It's pretty straightforward, but then again, so is My Hero Academia, but people are quick to point out that it's all about the execution and intrigue. And yeah, the litany of best girls. This one takes top marks from me. So yeah, that does it. Strike 3 looking, bottom of the 9th. This ball game's over, folks. I'll see you next time.